So first a correction. And this is what happens because in your head you're like what you're saying, but then you go Google it and you're like, okay, I had it wrong a little bit. On the last one where I was talking about declaration, right? Giving it a name and scope we talked about. Initialization happens automatically when it is declared, which means under the covers, JavaScript gives it some memory. It's the assign. So the equal is the assign. I can't remember if that's exactly what I said, but if it's not, that's what I want you to know. So remember, the assign does not check equality. It only assigns a value in to the variable that has been declared and in that case initialized under the cover. Okay, hope that clears it up. It did for me. Now let's do the next thing. Here's what you want to have. You're going to code along with me. There's a commit that you'll do at the end. So I already have set up, so you can pause this and do the same. Set up a new folder in our JS class, whatever yours is named. Have your indexed, have your main.js, have your script tag with main.js in it, and in there have h1 with functions. And then in your main.js, I just started a comment. Functions are fun because in my opinion, they are. Functions are basically a block of code that you can run once or many times, and it helps you. And we talked about modularizing code here. Functions are really a way we can do relatively short amount of work, effectively reuse it, so we don't have to write that function again. And it is just going forward the way most of the code that you will write will be handled as far as inside or calling a function and doing something. So let's just start with the basic function. We're going to call function. No, not we're going to call a function. We're going to name a function. So the first thing is a new command you haven't seen, I'm guessing, unless you've done programming and then you've seen that. And I'm going to say do math. Okay, we're going to do some math, and then I open and close a parentheses, and then I do the curly braces. Okay, so that's the function signature itself. Okay, and this is a signature is just that basic format of what pieces of syntax you need in order to write a function. So that is its. Now, there's also, and I'm just going to say this is actually one of my other points, and I typically like to do it like this. You don't have to. I ended up doing some research, and this seems to be the way most people do it, but you could also uh, do it this way where you actually define, wrong way, right? You actually don't have to use, and you just do it this way. Now I'm going to do it another way in a minute, but using arrow functions. But it seems to me, looking around the web, and this is where I'm changing because I used to be really hard. You have to use const when you're doing functions, which kind of makes sense, honestly, because you can't overwrite them. Okay, but maybe we'll switch later. For now, we'll just keep it this way. Okay, so now inside of here, and do make sure, right, as a default, make sure you're tabbed inside so that we can say, okay, inside this function, there's some code. So let's declare a result, and we'll say equal. Now in this case, right, what are we doing? We're assigning, we're declaring, right? So if you forgot, go look, right? Because it's good to understand, right? So we declared, which it got initialized, and now we're getting ready to assign it. But in this case, we're not just going to say 40. Let's actually do a little math and talk about, because in terms of functions, you kind of not typically, you're often doing some kind of mathematical function or something else, but math is pretty common. 10, let's say, times. Now, in this case, it's an operator. You may not have seen this before. That's okay. 10 times 4. Okay. Now, at this point, we won't see anything in the output. Okay. Let me just show you. I'm going to go ahead. Am I running live server? I must have been somewhere. Let's just go ahead and run live server. There is my 11. By the way, the reason that shows up, just FYI, like that, is because we, in the way that have the course set up, and I see this in my other classes, have a folder inside of the repo. If we had just this folder, it would default, and actually it's probably also because I have the JavaScript and not the index file open as well. That's probably the other reason. So it's like, oh, hey, where do you want me to start is basically what it's saying when it does this. So you can just point to it. Okay, so there's functions, inspect, and now under inspect, when you come down to console, here we go, because at this point we're typically only looking at the console so far, so there's nothing in there. Now, wait a minute, let's do wooden console dot log, and we'd say, because I know Rio showed us these fancy way of doing, right? Wouldn't that print result? It doesn't print result, right? Again, I know you see all this other stuff down here, but you're not seeing the console log here. Remember, always look over here as well, because you can see what is running. And I told you before on mine, because of my recording, it throws a bunch of stuff inside of there. So why not? Why doesn't this function do what we want it to do? It's because we haven't invoked it. So if I wanted to invoke it, which basically means call it means just, make it run. So in my JavaScript, I could say do math, right? But I have to use that open and close parentheses. Okay, open and close parentheses is basically in the other term you often hear here is evoking, calling, right? That function. So now that I've called that function, I come back over here and now I see 40, right? And I can even put a little more content. This is the result. Right? So this is the result. It is 40. Notice how I put a space again. These template strings, use them going forward. They're just really great. Now that's its a basic function. Okay. It also has scope, which we'll talk about in a little while. Right. So, but in this case, right, what if we wanted to actually instead of, because if I called this again, right, so do math again, it's going to do the same thing. That's not a lot of function. That's not a lot of flexibility. Let's make this function flexible. How can we make this function scalable and flexible? Is instead of, we'll do that again in a minute, how we, in this case, are hard coding these values in here. What if we, in this case, pass them into the function? So let's say 10, and then we're going to use actually, let's just do 10 to start, okay? Now, in this case, I'm passing 10 into here, but in this case, I've still hard coded 10. That won't work, okay? So what are we going to do? We could, in this case, actually give it a variable name that is going to be scoped into here. So for simplicity for now, let's just call it A, okay? A then, when this calls do math, this function, it passes to the local scope a variable A that is that in this case is initialized and declared and initialized and assigned. That whole process it's happening under the covers, right? And now if I said result A, what would we see? We'd see 10. And that often, just that process right there can seem really mysterious. It's like, what is going on here? So let's actually break it down. Let's go into sources. Let's go into main. And this is something you, I hope, learn because it's so important. Right here, I'm going to set what's called a breakpoint. And all I'm doing is clicking on and highlighting this line. So what happens here is now I hit refresh and it halts the execution of this code. And it says, okay, what I'm about to do, and that's what it's doing. It's paused right here. Okay. And we have some nice little functions, nice little, not functions, well, they are kind of functions, nice little icons in order to, in this case, we'll start with step. I'm just going to step into here. So I'm invoking function called do math. I'm going to step into the execution. And when that line runs in JavaScript, notice what it does. The control, and how do you know control, is this line says I have called function. I've passed in A is now equal to 10. And now let result equal to A, right? That's the line it's on. Boom. And now it says, now I actually have two variables. I'm going to make this even simpler in a minute. Okay. Console.log. This is the result. So now actually the control, the execution is going to call another program, and now it outputs, and now it returns to the next line because this line executed. Really learn how to do that. Well, I'm going to show you again and again. So it's kind of like using Git. You're going to learn it again and again and again. So learn it now. And as we go further, it will help you understand, visualize what this code is doing. Okay. So I just realized this as I'm running it. I'm like, you know what? I actually don't need this line. But if I don't define a variable, then I can just use what's passed in. That's kind of cool. Made my code simpler, which by the way, I'm still on debugger, so I just have to let it run, right? And it does this thing where it calls, in my case, this other script. And what I can do is just say, hit complete it, boom, we're done. Now let's do it again. Notice what happened to is it loaded my new code here. Okay, so I'm going to do this again. I'm going to hit refresh because my breakpoint is set. Hit refresh, hit next step. Again, a equals 10, so I don't have to do this line. I've commented it out. It still works. Boom. And then it outputs the result that I wanted. Okay, pretty simple. I hope that, and by the way, this is a great place to start putting notes and questions you might want to ask me. But in this case, we're not actually doing math, are we? We're not actually doing math. To do math, remember what I had before is I had that other variable or that other value, and it was 4. So now how do I modify this function to accept 2 values? Okay, not just 1, but 2. So that's how I did it. I do the first value, which will now be A. And now the second value, because I haven't declared it or I haven't passed it, which gets that whole process of declaration, right? Initialization, that whole process, because I can't really use it, right? It's not anywhere in there, which by the way, there is a way, but for the purposes of this discussion, we'll just say it's not usable until I do something like this and I say comma B. Okay, so now I have A, 10, B, 4. When I call the function passed into here, right? And now I can go back to this because maybe I need it. Or actually, no, I don't even have to do that. I can just say A, let's do math. Let's do A times B. Okay, A times B. Oh, again, I have to let this run because I was stopping the execution, right? So now let's refresh it again. Now I see my new code. I'm going to do math, call math. I'm going to pass 10 and 4. That becomes inside this function, this scoped A and B. And then once I'm inside of here, then I can do some math by console logging A times B. Cool? Look at that for a minute. Walk through that for a minute. Notice how now when I call the function, I get A equal 10, B equal 4, because I passed them in. And now this line's going to execute. Boom. It executed. Now I saw it on the console. I do the next line, and boom, we're back here. We're pretty much done. I could go ahead and hit complete, so it's done, and I get, because notice what happened here as well, right? Because I had stopped this execution here, it actually wasn't putting anything. Let's just see that again because that's good to see. As I was, oh, actually, it was because it was refreshed. That's why. Yeah, I was refreshing it. I was looking over here and going, why didn't it show function? Right. Anyway, so at that point, let's go back and look. Okay, so this is, we wrote our first function. I showed you different ways. I talked about const, but now let's talk about this. Okay, returning values, because let's say I wanted to use that value somehow, right? I wanted to use it in some kind of math operation. I know big multiplication here, which by the way, you can also do divide and do that, right? Look at it, do divide, see what that looks like, run it. Okay, 2.5, right? So do all, as a matter of fact, let's just do this. I'm going to have you do this before I move on. Do console.log, do all the math operations, times, right? Let's do plus, okay. And then we'll take a little pause here and let you commit this code, right? Let's run it. There we go. This is the old code. So there we go. Step through it. Oh, look at that. Look at that. Okay. That's cool. All right. So here's what you want to do. Go ahead and commit this code right now. Git add star git commit. Okay. Fun with functions. There we go. Okay, now you don't have to push yet because we're going to do a little more work, but I'm going to pause here before I get to the return because I think the return needs its own video, and I'm trying to keep these a little shorter because I know I'm a little more winded sometimes.